There is a strange paradox about responsibility. The more dependable a person becomes, the fewer people they feel comfortable depending on. In every family, every organization, every community, there is usually one person who carries more than everyone else. Not loudly, not visibly, but quietly. They are the one people call when something goes wrong, the one expected to remain calm when everyone else is overwhelmed. And over time, responsibility becomes identity. You are no longer simply responsible. You become the responsible one. But identity carries weight, because when everyone depends on you, people stop asking if you need help. Psychology calls this responsibility load. Scripture simply calls it burden. And when responsibility is carried too long, without rest, even strength begins to feel heavy. Responsibility is one of the most admired traits in society. Families depend on it. Organizations depend on it. Communities function because certain people quietly carry more weight than others. These are the people who plan ahead, the ones who anticipate problems before they happen, the ones who solve issues before anyone else notices them. And because they are dependable, more responsibility slowly finds them, not intentionally, not dramatically, but gradually, until one day they realize something subtle has changed. They are no longer simply helping. They have become the person everything depends on. Psychologists sometimes describe this pattern as role consolidation. When a role is repeated long enough, it becomes identity. You are no longer someone who acts responsibly. You become the responsible one. And identity is much harder to release than responsibility itself. The psychology of the responsibility fatigue. Responsibility does not only affect what a person does, it slowly changes how they think. Psychologists describe this as cognitive load. The mind begins to carry multiple layers of awareness at the same time. Responsible people rarely live moment to moment. Instead, they are constantly thinking ahead. What might go wrong? What needs to be prepared? What must be prevented? And what others may not yet see. Over time, this habit of anticipation becomes automatic. The brain begins running quiet calculations in the background, while others are simply experiencing the present. The responsible person is already managing the future. This creates competence. It builds trust. It makes that person appear stable and reliable. But there is a hidden cost. Because the mind that constantly anticipates problems rarely fully relaxes. Even in moments of rest, part of the brain remains alert, watching, planning, preparing. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as low-grade cognitive vigilance. Not a crisis, not panic, but a steady mental pressure that never completely turns off. And when that pressure continues for long periods of time, fatigue slowly accumulates. Not dramatic exhaustion, but a quieter kind. The kind that makes a person feel tired, even when nothing obvious has gone wrong. When exhaustion searches for escape, responsibility fatigue does not always appear as collapse. More often, it appears as escape. When the mind carries pressure for long periods of time, it naturally begins searching for relief. Not because a person is weak, but because the brain is trying to restore balance. Sometimes that relief looks harmless at first, a distraction, a habit, something that quiets the mind for a moment. But when exhaustion is never addressed, relief can slowly become dependence. Psychology describes this as compensatory behavior. The mind begins leaning on something that temporarily reduces stress. Food, endless work, entertainment, substances, control, or any habit that numbs the internal pressure. What began as relief slowly becomes escape, and escape, when repeated often enough, can become addiction. Not always dramatic addiction, but quiet patterns that slowly become self-destructive. Habits that promise relief, but quietly increase the burden. When escape becomes destructive. When exhaustion is ignored for too long, the mind begins searching for stronger forms of relief. Sometimes, that relief turns into patterns that slowly damage a person's life. For some people, it becomes dependency on substances, illegal drugs that promise temporary escape, but quietly destroy clarity, health, and purpose. For others, it becomes gambling, the illusion that one moment of luck might erase the pressure of responsibility. But gambling rarely solves pressure. More often, it multiplies it. And for many people, the escape becomes endless entertainment, constant distraction, constant stimulation, constant noise that keeps the mind from facing the deeper questions of life. The problem is not entertainment itself. Music, art, creativity, and learning can actually become powerful outlets for restoration. Music, for example, can become a place where emotion is expressed instead of suppressed, where creativity replaces destructive escape, where a person begins discovering abilities and talents they never fully explored. The difference is intention. One path numbs the mind, the other develops it. One path hides from life, the other builds something meaningful within it. Scripture addresses destructive patterns with remarkable clarity. In 1 Corinthians 6:12, "I have the right to do anything," you say, "but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything." This verse speaks directly to addiction. Anything that begins to master a person slowly takes control of their life. But the path toward freedom begins with awareness, and awareness invites transformation. In James 4:7, "Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you." Resistance is not passive. It requires discipline, new habits, new environments, new ways of thinking. Sometimes the very energy that drives a person toward destructive habits can be redirected. Pressure can become creativity. Struggle can become growth. Silence can become reflection. And many people discover that when they begin creating instead of escaping, writing, learning, building, composing, or serving others, their mind slowly begins to heal. Because purpose is one of the strongest antidotes to addiction. Escape promises relief, but purpose restores strength. And the journey toward freedom often begins with one honest question. What in my life is quietly mastering me? And eventually, every person reaches a moment when they must ask themselves an honest question. Is this habit helping me grow or quietly mastering me? And that question leads to the most important turning point of all, the moment of self-awareness. The most important turning point is awareness, because a habit cannot be changed until it is first recognized. Scripture speaks directly to this moment. In 1 Corinthians 10:23 it says, "I have the right to do anything," you say, "but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything builds up." In other words, not every relief is healing. Some relief quietly weakens us, while other disciplines strengthen us. And awareness is the moment a person begins seeing the difference. The discipline of transformation. Real freedom begins with transformation, not only of behavior, but of thinking. Scripture describes this process clearly. In Romans 12:2, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Habits change when thinking changes, and thinking changes when awareness becomes discipline. This transformation is rarely instant, it is gradual. But every honest moment of awareness moves a person closer to freedom. Freedom from the habits of self-destruction. This discussion gave you something to think about. Leave your perspective in the comments below. You can also support the work by liking the video and subscribing to The Quiet Authority Official. And if you enable notifications, you'll be updated whenever a new analysis is released. Exhaustion can lead people toward escape. But escape is not the same as rest. Rest restores. Escape only postpones. Which is why wisdom invites us to pause, examine the patterns of our lives, and choose the disciplines that lead toward strength. Because responsibility carried wisely becomes leadership. But responsibility carried blindly becomes burden. Escape promises relief. But relief can quietly become dependence, and dependence can slowly begin to master a person's life. Anything that begins to master a person slowly reshapes their life. Which is why awareness becomes the first step toward freedom. But understanding how escape turns into destructive habits is a deeper discussion. And that is exactly what we will explore next.